Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Nicole Lamberson. I was trained as a physician assistant, and I serve on the outreach team for the award-winning documentary Medicating Normal. I'm also a survivor of psychiatric medications and protracted withdrawal injury. Our guest today is Jan DeFehr. Jan is an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Winnipeg. Informed by her previous clinical social work practitioner experience, Jan's course development, teaching, and research focuses on building public access to the scientific, ethical, and anti-colonial critiques of mental health premises and practices that have been produced by patients, ex-patients, psychiatric survivors, academics, and professionals. Her latest book is called A Critical Mental Health Primer Towards Informed Choice in Education, Social Services, and Healthcare. It's this pretty purple book here. And we have a link for you guys if anybody wants to check out her book after, hearing from Jan. So welcome. Thanks for coming today. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear
Yeah.
you very well. Yeah, I was assuming the welcome went to absolutely everybody, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me here, Nicole.
Yeah.
It's an honor and a privilege.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you just after the first, few minutes off camera that we had together to get to know each other. So first, I guess, tell everybody who's listening, how you found us and what you do.
Okay. Well, I found you online,
Mhm.
probably because of the number of people that you've been meeting with
Mhm.
who have been really influential in challenging mental health premises and practices. And so, yeah, it's your interviews that have connected me to Medicating Normal.
Mhm.
And what I do is I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Education, as you mentioned. I teach mental health courses for the faculty, but what I do is I teach the critical scholarship that is normally excluded from mental health curricula and mental health campaigns. So that's the body of scholarship that very much exposes and confronts misinformation and potential for harm in the field of mental health. And of course, I'm eager to say this at the outset. Many people have found, you know, traditional mental health services to be really helpful,
Mhm.
and they wouldn't change a thing. And I have no dispute with any of those folks, but it's also the case that many people have been harmed. And
Mhm.
so the critical scholarship, as you mentioned earlier, is informed by people who have had direct experience in the system, by academics, by professionals, and sometimes those are all the same.
Yeah.
One person may occupy all those spots.
Yeah. And so how did you, I mean, this is a very niche class that you're teaching. Were you just practicing social work and seeing problems, and then you thought, something here that needs to be explored further and taught in a class? Like, how did you come up with this? Because I don't think this class is being taught, you know,
Previously,
well, just anywhere, really. Yeah.
I mean, mad studies courses and departments are popping up at universities around North America, and I think around the world.
Okay.
So I'm not extremely isolated, although I do think there is some isolation that is built into the work. I
Mhm.
worked for 20 years prior to my academic work as a clinical social worker, and the last 5 of those years, I was providing counseling services for students at the university where I now teach. And I began to have a couple of conversations with the dean of education at that time, Ken McCluskey. Not a whole lot of conversation, but we did meet a couple of times. And he used to work as a school psychologist and was extremely concerned with the medicalization of um, students' struggles, especially where those struggles were related to poverty, colonization, um, and other experiences that marginalized people have to contend with in our systems.
Mhm.
And so he was my connection to the Faculty of Education. I was invited in, began working in 2015, and developing courses, teaching. So building public access
Mhm.
to the critique is my main teaching and research area.
Okay. And you said there's other courses popping up in the same space as yours. Have you had connection with any of the other professors who are teaching this in other, countries or places?
Um, Definitely, York University has a Mad Studies hub, and I have recently made some connections with people there. Really grateful for that. Um, yeah, I think also the book has helped me connect with others around the world that are doing critical, but not just critical, also constructive work, I think.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's been wonderful to hear from people, and I don't know, I hope that there will be a way for people to reach me through my email after our interview if anyone wants to talk further or raise a concern or a criticism
Mhm.
or question or anything. I do love hearing from people around the world.
Yeah, we can share your email, certainly, and we'll put it in the description box for anybody who's watching later, like on YouTube or something when we upload it. So, perfect.
Fantastic.
Um, so tell me about the book and why you decided to, because you're teaching, right? But why a book? Like, who do you want to reach with it, and what kind of impact do you want to have?
Well, it's a great question. Why a book?
Hmm.
Because I can, assemble all kinds of readings from the peer-reviewed scholarship. There's an endless, supply. So then why create a book? I guess my first response to that question would be I'm thinking of others teaching in family therapy programs or social work programs, um, psychiatric nursing. As the book says, social services, education, and healthcare. So those are really broad areas, all of which have mental health pedagogy.
Yeah.
So I wanted to create a resource
Hmm.
that might support others who would like to kind of veer into more of this area,
Hmm.
who want to catch up with some of the paradigm shifts that are underway, but maybe don't quite feel like they are supported in doing that. And so the book hopefully provides a tangible resource, a synthesis, and an expansion of the existing critique.
Hmm.
Also, there's a lot of reference to, um, I guess, Canadian um, work,
Hmm.
academics and practitioners. So that's an advantage for me because of where I'm located. But there's reference throughout the book to work that's happening throughout the world. So
Okay.
yeah, and I guess if I could just add one more comment,
Sure.
I wanted to create a resource that portrayed the mental health system as a system of the colonial state.
Can you expand on that a bit? What you mean by that?
Well, there's many pockets of critique and critical communities of practice. There have been for many decades.
Hmm.
Um, but I guess it was close to around 2015 when I read some work by Dr. Emile Joseph at McMaster University,
Hmm.
and I understood his writing to be calling for more of an anti-colonial analysis of mental health services.
Hmm.
So the idea being that the mental health system is one system amongst many within the colonial state, that none of those systems are standalone. They all sort of operate within each other.
Mhm.
They exist in partnership. You could say each one is just an email away. So
Mhm.
that means carceral systems and education, child welfare system, immigration, yeah,
Mhm.
everything interconnected. And the coloniality of these systems, I guess I felt that, following his invitation, and his leadership, that perhaps more could be done.
So you mentioned him. I'm just curious, being in this space and kind of digging around in everything that exists out there on this topic, who are some of your, kind of favorite folks that you've come across that you like to read or that you found their work just profound?
Okay. Well, first of all, Arthur Manuel, I'm looking up because I see his books above me.
Mhm.
Normally they're beside me. His 2015 and 2017 books, writing about Canada as a colonial state, not just, in some distant past, but in the present, the way it um, causes um, dispossession, mass dispossession of land. He writes about the lay of the land, the 98.8%, 0.2% system in Canada. I won't go into more detail with that right now, but um, yeah, Arthur Manuel's writing, Joseph Gahn, Catherine Richardson, um, Renee Linklater, Michael Hart. I'm thinking of the British academics and practitioners now, Joanna Moncrief, John Reed. Um,
Yeah, I'm familiar with those too, very much so. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
James Davies. China
Mhm.
Mills also is another anti-colonial scholar, I would say.
Mm.
Our colleagues with Drop the Disorder, Joe Watson, and so on.
Mhm.
Lucy Johnstone. Um, yeah, those are some names that come to mind at
Yeah,
the moment. There's so many voices in this book. I feel like I can hardly think of it as just my own.
yeah, yeah. So tell us, I guess, in the first part of the book, you kind of critique psychiatry and mental health systems. And what do you think are like the most pressing flaws in the current mental health system, if you had to narrow it down?
Okay. Um,
Tough question, I know. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but a really important question.
Mhm.
Um, from what I see interacting with people around these topics all the time, there's still widespread misunderstanding. There is an assumption that mental health diagnoses, or if we want to call them mental disorder diagnoses or psychiatric disorder diagnoses, that they're based on evidence of pathology. Psychiatry, of course, is a medical specialty. And so I think members of the public have this understanding that if you pick up a diagnosis in psychiatry, your diagnosis would be similar to, if you picked up a heart disease diagnosis or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
So one major flaw, and I think I start the book with discussion around scientific evidence, is that we don't have scientifically valid biomarker evidence of pathology for mental illness diagnoses, or if you want to say DSM diagnoses. And I think it's important to clarify that there are a few out of close to 400 that do require biomarker evidence. But as the
Mhm.
book discusses, those diagnoses are primarily studied in other medical specialties, diagnoses like dementia diagnoses or sleep apnea.
Mhm.
So it comes as a surprise to people usually in my courses. Um, yeah, that diagnoses, even like bipolar or schizophrenia, do not require evidence of pathology. And I think this relates to another flaw. There are no lab tests available or required for diagnosis.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, in other words, we are pathologizing human difference, human distress,
Mm.
human struggle. Um, some of it, like, is can be understood through a disability lens. We're pathologizing this human experience when we don't have evidence of pathology.
Mm.
So my concern is then that in pathologizing human experience, human struggle, we're decontextualizing it.
Mhm.
We're individualizing distress, and we're depoliticizing distress.
Mm.
And we're describing it in the mental health system predominantly as individual deficit and disease.
Yeah. Something is wrong with you.
Something is
Mhm.
wrong with you. So
Yeah.
yeah, so the book starts with that, with sort of a summary of the scientific critique
Mm.
of mental health diagnoses. Um, and then I guess, I move into anti-colonial critique of mental health premises and practices, considering the question of how does the mental health system extend the colonizing project? Not
Mm.
how is it a metaphor? Uh, I don't want to think along those lines, but how does the mental health system entrench, expand, extend colonial logics and practices? Talk about potential for harm in the book as well, and critique related to psychiatric drug use. I try to do that from
Mhm.
a harm reduction perspective that is not moralizing about whether drugs are good or bad, but saying, let's be sure that we're providing all the information that people need so that they
Mhm.
can arrive at a decision that feels right for them, which
Yeah.
might not be the decision that I would choose,
Yeah.
but I respect their right to have
Yeah.
an informed choice.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? Does that
Yeah.
begin?
Yeah, totally. Um, I was going to say, you said your class or people who take the class seem surprised that there's no tests or things like that. Have you come across, the studies um, where they go out and poll how many, it may be Americans, I'm not sure, so don't quote me, but still believe that, the mental, I mean, help me here. I'm losing my train
That
of
that
thought. The chemical
that
imbalance theory
so-called
is alive and
that
well.
so-called
Yes,
mental disorders are caused by chemical imbalance.
correct. Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
see, I mean, I assume you bring that up in your teachings and
definitely.
do
And of
most people
course,
taking your class still believe that is a thing?
well, and I don't want to do them a disservice. I want to say, like, I also want to credit people in the learning communities that I'm part of,
Mhm.
as also contributing to the critique, because people share from their personal experiences too. And so it's definitely not a matter of me just sharing, but it's
Yeah.
kind of sharing. That's not quite the right word for it, like teaching.
Yeah.
But the learning is very much reciprocal in those settings. Um,
Well, probably especially with the numbers of people who are consumers of mental health care.
yeah,
Like you don't have to look far,
all of
Yeah.
us are like for the most part are psychiatrized in one way or another. Um, Yeah, I've been following the work of Joanna Moncrief and her colleagues related to
Mhm.
this chemical imbalance. Um, I don't know, it's like mythology that never quite goes away. I would say I haven't seen the surveys that you're talking about or the studies that you're mentioning, like how many people still,
Yeah.
believe that that's the case, but it's still where I come from, it's assumed.
Yeah. I mean, you see it online all the time. Just even when we put out a new video or, warning people of risks and harms of a certain drug class, somebody inevitably or many people respond and say, well, I know they have risks, but I have a chemical imbalance. And so, I need these drugs. And that's obviously what their prescriber has told them, Um, yeah, it's alive and well from what I see.
I think it's still alive and well, and so it's important for people to know we've never had a test for chemical imbalance
Hmm.
in the field of mental health. We've never had a test for chemical balance. Like, what would that even be? Our body chemistry is changing all the time, and
Yeah. Yeah, we don't even know what a baseline normal is for anyone.
right.
Yeah. So how can you tell that you're away from it if you haven't even defined what it is, Yeah.
I think it has been important too for people to understand the difference between hypothesis generating research and conclusion generating bodies of research.
Hmm.
And so if the public has heard for decades that we may have chemical imbalances, uh, yeah, I think that's often where the surprise is that people realize, that the study that you thought you saw, like, let's revisit it. What are
Hmm.
its claims? Was it successful in supporting its claims?
Yeah.
If you're making a scientific claim, you need scientific evidence.
Do you find though that when you're teaching, like, I mean, this is my own frustration. Most people who aren't, PhDs, academics, they don't know how to interpret studies to determine if it's a good one or a bad one or a reliable one or unreliable or what's the flaws of it or. And so it feels like, when you're just a lay person, everybody says, well, the science says this and the science says that. Like both sides are saying they have science, and you kind of throw up your hands and say, well, you can find an argument for just about anything, anywhere that will sort of someone will use to back their stance. Do you encounter some of that resistance? Wi-
Yeah, absolutely. I would say not so much in the classroom, but amongst other academics or professionals that have a deep investment in the system the way it is and don't want to see any challenge to it.
Mhm.
So, um, but my feeling is like, show us. Let's look at that study that you thought was so compelling. Let's
Yeah.
look at it together. I'm happy to be proven wrong. We're I science, as I understand it, is all about making corrections and recalibrating as we go along, as more information becomes available.
Mhm.
So, if we're able to discover biomarker evidence for, I don't know, one of the depression diagnoses or something like that, of course, I would, I don't know, I would celebrate that. That's important information if that's something that we can establish. So, yeah,
Yeah.
often titles are much more, showy, um, and if people even take the time to visit, the abstract or the conclusion or the portion of the report where they indicate flaws in the study
Mhm.
and limitations, then often things look really quite different. And I think it's kind of a unified uh, call amongst all the critical academics and professionals and psychiatric survivors is like, show us.
Yeah.
If you feel you have the evidence, that's fantastic. Let's see it. But yeah,
Yeah. What I like about your work is that you include everyone, like patients, physicians, PhDs, a range of people who have a say in what's happened to them or their opinions of, critiques of the existing system, but so much outside of, your teachings, like when you're in quote unquote the real world, and if you try to raise critiques, people say, like, are you a doctor? Like, show me your,
Mm.
what, what basis do you have this opinion? It's not good enough that you're just someone who experienced something and are sharing. Do you find that that's part of the problem, like with how everything is set up, is that everybody thinks that they have to kind of like defer to authority in all cases?
I really appreciate that question because it immediately reminds me of, a critique I heard from a colleague that since I am not a prescriber and have never been a prescriber, how can I offer any critique of psychiatric drugs
Mm-hmm.
or prescribing and so on?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel in response to that that it's useful to take a step back and just see how academia works in so many other fields, especially in critical fields. So, for example, in critical criminal justice um, pedagogy, yeah, you don't have to be a police officer or have experience as a police officer to develop critique or to engage or expand critique of
Mhm.
policing. It's
Yeah.
just not it's not the way academia works in all other areas, and so, um, but I do think it's important to understand, for myself to understand my limitations,
Hmm.
and so, in the part of the book where I share critique of psychiatric drugs, you'll notice that there's much more quotations in that section
Yeah.
because I'm not a pharmacist and I'm not a prescriber. I never have been. So, uh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. I can see, yeah, as someone who's been a practicing clinician, seeing patients, I get what, clinicians are saying when they're like, oh, it's one thing to like read a bunch of books and talk to people and then critique when you're not the one who's sitting across from the patient and have to like make these difficult decisions. Like, I understand that. But then to just completely shut down that anyone who isn't an MD or a pharmacist has any say. Like in that case, like why wouldn't the patients have the most say? Because they're the ones who have actually taken the drugs, they should be the highest experts, I think, but that's not how it works. That's not the weight is not being given to the patients who are taking the stuff. Yeah.
Who are best positioned to speak for themselves. And I guess one significant development that has happened is people organizing
Mhm.
and sharing, withdrawal strategies and
It's
stories of
stories.
harm so that
Yeah.
you don't feel like, am I the only one? And you realize there's so many of us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I first got sick, it was 2010, and it was like barely anything existed, and people were terrified, self included, to talk about this because there was, I mean, you want to talk about stigma. It's not, or at least at the time, t the taking of the drugs that was so stigmatized, in my opinion. It was being injured by them because here you are, someone saying, I stopped my psych meds, and everybody thinks, oh, are you a dangerous, mental patient now because you're off your meds?
Mhm.
Instead of it's the stopping them that caused this like withdrawal syndrome that made me so ill. On top of when people hear the word withdrawal, they think drug addict. They don't think, oh, just neuroadaptation to a substance and now you have to come off of it. So it's the people coming off of meds who are highly, highly stigmatized, in my opinion. Um, but it's gotten better, like you say. I mean, I think some people started coming forward, and then other people said, oh, like I'm going to join that, and it became safer because there are power in numbers when you see like all these other people are saying me too, me too, me too, me too,
Mm,
and now the internet is just filled
yeah,
these important voices, which is how you create change. When there's enough anecdote,
yeah.
hopefully somebody says it's not evidence, it's anecdote, but it's so overwhelming. We should probably take a look at this because something's happening, you know?
Mm,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I guess part of the stigma that you experience in coming forward with a story like that is that's not the story, that I don't know, the power brokers want you to tell,
Yeah.
and it threatens the system, which is
Mhm.
supposed to be about helping.
Yeah.
So I know that I'm not telling you something you don't already know, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
unsettling.
Well, how about the critique of your pill shaming? Have you experienced that in your own work?
Um, definitely.
Mm.
Um, sometimes people, their use of their psychiatric drug is really important for them to verify that they have some kind of biological pathology or deficit that
Mhm.
the drug is correcting.
Mhm.
And so um, I guess to start to look at some of the unsubstantiated claims around psychiatric drugs is feels really threatening, and it can be, I think, easy for some people to jump ahead, um, yeah, and make an assumption. Um, I don't know that you have some malevolent intent or something like that.
Like to
I
take
do
their
remember hearing from
meds
one
away.
person
Yeah.
that the critique of psychiatric drugs is offensive. That was the word, that was used.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And what do you say to that? I mean, I know what I say, which is something is happening here because if Toyota sends me a notice that there's something risky about my car, I'm usually pleased to get that information. And all these people are doing is they're sending you the letter that your airbags are faulty, or, it's a possibility that this could go wrong because they've taken the product or used it and they're reporting on what's happening. There's no judgment in the report. If you want to keep driving your Toyota with a faulty bag, go ahead, but just letting you know. But something about this, the information is not wanted, they are offended by it.
and sometimes angry.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. I
Mhm.
mean, I think it can be helpful for us to take a step back sometimes, in preparation for those kinds of discussions and not for people to just sort of plunge into them, but kind of to prepare for them, to
Mhm.
remind people that the field of mental health is profoundly divided
Mhm.
concerning its core assumptions and practices. And so then I say with people that I'm meeting with, we should expect that we will have differences of opinions amongst us as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, if
could
the
we
experts can't even agree,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
mhm.
So so then could we create a learning environment together where we have respect
Mhm.
for differences of opinion and realize that a lot of things that we discuss when we're looking at the critiques are painful topics for people and are so it can be so profoundly disappointing for people to encounter this critical knowledge, and often people wonder, like, why didn't I hear about this until now? We have decades of
Mhm.
peer-reviewed scholarship that never make it into university coursework.
Yeah. into
Um,
medical schools,
in medical schools
into,
and so on, it's
yeah,
usually blocked by certain gatekeepers. It's not, um, I don't know, I think it's not coincidental that that knowledge is not shared with the public.
yeah,
So I think it can be helpful to invite people together to create a space where we could learn together and support each other and to realize that some of these topics hit us close to home.
yeah.
They remind us of our own experience, the experience of our children, or for teachers, sometimes the experience of their students and so on.
Mhm,
But I also find it helpful to remind people that professional ethics in the helping professions absolutely mandate
mhm,
full disclosure, especially if there's a body of knowledge that relates to risk or harm. So, if I want to practice in an ethical manner, if if my work relates to the mental health system, I should, I have a duty to
mhm.
follow the ethics guidelines that have been outlined because they help protect the public. And I like your example of the airbag or, the recall with Toyota or,
Yeah,
wherever it may be, or
Hyundai,
the little
whatever you're
disclosure
driving.
that may come with a mammogram or whatever that lets people know about harm.
Yeah,
But if I could, I think this
yeah,
this statement by Shira Hassan, liberatory harm reduction practitioner and author and so on.
mhm,
Um, I think it's relevant to the question that you just asked. Um,
sure.
she writes, knowledge is power, and withholding knowledge is an extreme exertion of power. Sharing life saving information is part of how we get freer.
Mm,
So, making the decision to block public access, whether it's school access or
mm,
patient access at a particular clinic, to block their access to established peer-reviewed scholarship that's been informed by patients, ex-patients, survivors, professionals, academics,
mhm.
is an act of power,
Yeah.
and it's an ethical issue.
Mhm. So on that note, then, how do you think the current systems are falling short of ethical care? Like, what does ethical care look like outside of the dominant biomedical model that we have now?
Thank you for this question as well. I was just at a conference where, um, following my presentation, it was put forward that we already have informed consent forms.
Mm,
That work is done.
yeah.
So,
No.
nothing new to see here. And,
Yeah.
but what I wanted to ask is how many of the diagnosticians in this group systematically let their clients know that diagnosis is permanent in the medical record, whether it's made by nurse practitioner, physician assistant, school psychologist, family physician.
Mhm.
How many how many are advising their clients that there's legal
Oh, yeah.
and other vocational, financial implications, ramifications, some of which are quite serious. Um, you know,
Yeah. I think
yeah,
of like a mother who, I mean, in my own case, if I had a kid, for example, and I was taking these psych drugs for work stress, and then I had all of these horrible withdrawal symptoms that were misdiagnosed as more serious so-called mental illness. I could have lost custody of that child on the basis of this faulty diagnosis that they gave me that all started because I was stressed out at my job. But if I had a husband who wanted to, you know, use that to his advantage in court, could have probably easily stripped me of my right to be a parent, which is scary, you know? When I entered the system, I did not think about that at all. I just thought, oh, I'm going to this doctor. She knows what she's doing. I'm having a hard time. Like, you know, yeah.
and Yeah, like a wholehearted yes to everything you just said there. And so often people don't even realize they are entering the mental health system because it is so multidisciplinary.
Mhm.
And in Canada, or at least in my province, we have community health clinics
Yeah.
full of a variety of medical practitioners. It's not clear to people who visit those clinics who has diagnostic authority to initiate a mental disorder assessment.
Mm.
The system is based on implied consent. If you
Mhm.
book the appointment, the assumption is that you have given consent to, a mental health assessment, and diagnosis could be several diagnoses, could be received, in the first minutes of a first appointment, as Ellen Francis has outlined. Psychologists tend to take more time,
Yeah. They use
but
like
I wouldn't
adjustment disorder as a sort of safer.
a kind of like catch all. But if we
Yeah.
look at the criteria for adjustment disorder, we can see that it's profoundly
Yeah.
patronizing
Yeah.
and unjust and doesn't leave room for human responses to profound loss
Yeah.
and
Grief, normal grief. Yeah.
grief,
Mhm.
oppression, and so on. So,
Yeah.
yeah, people aren't even certain, whose office they're in, so to speak. Am I meeting with a diagnostician, or am
Mhm.
I meeting with, you know, um, a family therapist that isn't authorized by the state? I think in the US, some of your family therapists, in some states, they do assign DSM diagnoses, and in other states, they aren't authorized to diagnose. In Canada, no family therapists are authorized to diagnose, but now clinical social workers are becoming, um, there's ways for them to get diagnostic privileges related to DSM. So it's confusing for the public.
Yeah.
I would say that the informed consent practices that are generally in place are
Mhm.
more about protecting the liability of the professional than anything,
Yeah.
that they don't clearly indicate key themes in the critical scholarship
Mhm.
related to misinformation and potential for harm. So they don't allow people to make an informed choice
Mhm.
around whether to go ahead. They arrive too late. The informed consent ethical process usually plays out while people are already in the office of the diagnostician. So the diagnostic opportunity is already underway.
Yeah. Instead of in advance of, all the things you're saying, like, I'm even thinking because you all in Canada, it's a bit different in the US. Like, I could probably escape my diagnosis if I moved because our health systems are sort of located to an area. So there'll be like big systems, but the ones that are here would not be in like another state. And so, um, I could get rid of my medical records in that way, but I would have to move. And so if I continue to live where I live, which is where I acquired my psychiatric withdrawal injury, I have all kinds of stuff, emergency medical records, that are going to follow me forever. That I was some quote unquote mental patient, even though I've not taken a psych med for over a decade. Um, yeah. And then maybe the informed consent about how difficult it is if you do get a diagnosis that you feel is bogus to get it off your record and what you would have to go through to walk that path.
Right.
Hmm.
So definitely in Canada, you can seek a second or third opinion, but each time you're entering additional diagnostic opportunity. And so someone could say, as you would know, no, it doesn't seem to me to be an anxiety disorder. I think it's PTSD. And yeah, psychiatry doesn't provide a mechanism to delete or reverse or undo that diagnosis, partly because it wasn't determined, on the basis of objective evidence in the first place. What's
Yeah. How do
yeah.
we know where it begins and ends?
Right, how do you know your distress is, abnormal?
Hmm.
Uh, or I mean, it's human to feel these things and experience sometimes difficult or perplexing or disruptive
Mhm.
feelings and behaviors. And at those times, we can support each other instead of, um, putting these lifelong labels on people.
Yeah. Um, in your work, have you looked towards other countries or other like um, communities, even like untouched tribes or anything like that, and how they deal with what we are calling so-called mental illness here and how it's different? Like, have you examined any of those types of things?
Yeah, definitely. And I uh, want to say, like at the outset, as somebody that is non-Indigenous,
Mhm.
I, yeah, I'm not the interpreter of those teachings, or um, u- usually I invite guests into my course, or I refer people to other other writing. But I'm just going to pull this off my shelf. This is
Yeah.
an example: decolonizing mental health, embracing Indigenous multi-dimensional balance. A lot of the Indigenous writers in this book um, talk about how they have always had ways of understanding
Mhm.
distress or difference, and addressing it from
Mhm.
within their own spiritual and cultural teachings. That doesn't mean all Indigenous practitioners oppose psychiatry,
Yeah.
like definitely not,
Mhm.
but we've always had other ways of supporting each other
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
don't depend on psychiatric lenses.
Yeah. I think most people, maybe I'm naive, but I think we could get most everyone to agree that we're we're kind of moving more towards being a sick society as far as how we like love and support each other, and even like our quickness to kind of turn away from shadow emotions and just send somebody to a random 1-800 number instead of like having strong community and relationships. I mean, that's a 5-hour long conversation in
Yeah,
itself. Everything that's wrong with the world. And I-
yeah.
yeah.
And I think there's a lot of commonality there between what you've just said and what's happening in, like, with criminalization. That
Mhm.
criminalization and pathologization, that those processes are so similar to each other. So
Mhm.
we have so many ways of othering people
Mhm.
and disappearing them. And
Yeah.
I think what you and others are calling for is more authentic community,
Mhm.
community-based care, community accountability, um, as the transformative
Resources.
justice people would say. What's
Yeah.
that? Sorry?
I said resources, just where, I
Yes,
mean, people ask me all the time,
redistribution.
yeah, where can I go? And I'm like, it doesn't exist. Like, or if it does, it's some small pocket little place that's like far away. Um, I'm thinking of people coming off of psychiatric drugs who want somewhere to go where everyone in that clinic is trained and understands that psychiatric drugs cause withdrawal syndromes, that you have to taper slowly, that it can look like so-called mental illness, but it's not. It's just a result of removing the medication too quickly and the body sort of having this rebound effect.
Mhm.
But the only places to go now are, unless you're,
Online.
yeah, online, unless you're incredibly lucky and you find some, needle in a haystack practitioner who's open-minded and who's done some reading and says, oh yeah, or who's willing. I mean, my doctor didn't know, but she was willing to read and believe me. I mean, that's all it takes, is somebody with
Mm.
enough. And, even she admitted to me, I just thought if something was wrong with a medicine, we'd hear from the FDA, you know? And I was like, well, that's what I thought too. But the more I know, the more I've been in this space, the more I've read and learned. Yeah. That's it's probably you're not going to get some warning until it's years and years and years of people pushing and trying, just like the antidepressant folks right now are petitioning the
Mhm.
FDA for label changes. And it's a very long process where people are harmed for a significant period of time before any updates are made, you know. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
the system changes slowly, and most of the systems within the colonial state serve the interests of the colonial state. So any shifts in power, are not going to be, are unlikely to be funded by the state.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why I think your work and the work of others is so important, because it helps build public access to important information, accurate
Yeah.
information.
So I guess on that note, like what advice would you give to professionals who want to advocate for change within their institutions, but they just feel like constrained by policy
Mm.
or culture?
Hmm.
Mm.
Discouraged by it.
Mhm. Yeah, all of the above.
Towards the end of the book, I offer strategies for
Mhm.
building public access to critical knowledge in the field of mental health.
Mhm.
And one of the strategies, um, I think it says walk in pairs. Of course, we don't have to walk just in pairs. It says like find others who share your concern,
Mhm.
even 2 or 3 others, then you have a group. So where possible, don't work alone. Find other professionals. Maybe it's somebody in another province or state or country.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was thinking of the sign on my university campus. It's a sign that's produced by security. I don't even know if it's up anymore, but it says, to ensure safety, walk in pairs, and then there's pictures of the fruit pear on the sign.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, I do think like if possible, to not act like a lone ranger, or yeah, but find others, form collectivities.
mhm.
You can support each other when you encounter resistance, which you will,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, we always, our community of those harmed and those who are critical is pretty big. I mean, and we have all kinds of, we have psychiatrists in our group. We have, family medical practitioners. We have nurse practitioners, PAs, nurses, psychologists, social, I mean, all the, we have celebrities. I mean, you know, so I would say if you're in that space and you're feeling alone, you can come, like there is a community that exists already of
mhm.
people. Yeah.
That there is support, and also information mobilization, knowledge mobilization that's happening there.
Yeah.
If there's an area where you feel like I'm not sure about this or I have questions about that,
Mhm.
but I find this and this research really compelling, where we can support our ongoing learning. Um, I also find it's important to anchor all critical work in
Mhm.
ethics. And then when people come at you, you can ask, are you asking me to go against my professional ethics? Because
Mhm.
my ethics do require full disclosure,
Yeah. But what happens
especially,
when your ethics rub up against standard of care?
well, yeah.
Isn't that the problem, right? The standard of care that we've established that everybody's just like, well, I'm just following the standard of care. I'm just following the standard of care.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any grand, perfect, complete answer to solving that kind of dilemma.
Yeah.
But one example that I discussed in the book was what the Women's Health Clinic did in my city, which
Mhm.
was they de-automated diagnosis,
Okay.
assessment and diagnosis, for example, and developed policy to help support that. and
Mhm.
online content and paper brochures, uh, so that, again, you're sharing information, you're sharing knowledge,
Mhm.
and you're careful that your knowledge is accurate and your claims are well supported.
Yeah.
And then you're respecting people's rights or needs
Yeah.
to make choices,
Yeah.
yeah, for themselves.
Yeah. You just made me think of a lot of psychiatrists that sort of encounter some of the material that we put out and say, well, if you tell the patients that, they're not going to trust the treatment. They're going to, it's probably not going to work already because they have this bad information or potentially bad information about it. And I can't, I mean, I'm shocked that ethically some people think that that's okay. Like, well, just because you want the medicine to work better or the placebo effect or whatever, you just think that it's ethical to not tell them, you know. But there's
Yeah.
so many times where that is the response, Well, if you plant the seed of negativity, you're already starting off on a bad foot.
And yet elsewhere in medicine, that is standard practice. Before you go get a mammogram, I maybe mentioned that earlier, you
Hmm.
read a disclosure that conveys potential for harm.
Yeah, surgery. I mean,
Exactly. You
yeah,
don't show up at an appointment and discuss,
yeah,
enter straight into a surgical procedure. Like, there's discussion that happens ahead of time, and people need to be made aware of potential for harm. So, yeah,
yeah,
it can never be considered an acceptable ethical strategy to withdraw information that people are entitled to make an informed choice. To me, that goes against the core premise at the center of all ethics,
yeah.
guidelines and
Mhm.
writings, research, and so on, is respect for individual autonomy, individual and collective autonomy.
Yeah. Where I find problem with informed consent is, well, if no one's believing, for example, I'll just talk like from the withdrawal piece, or people who are creating these documents say you get a piece of paper that says all these things can potentially go wrong about your medication.
Mhm,
But if we don't have enough studies, which, for example, benzodiazepines, I just served on the patient panel for the deprescribing guidance development that the FDA paid for over here. And they did this huge literature review for $2 million. It's where your tax money is going to find out that, oh, surprise, we barely have any evidence for deprescribing benzos or what happens, or so the science isn't there even. So everything was based on clinical consensus, the
mhm,
recommendations and things. And thank goodness they included patients. Um, they didn't always listen to us, but they did have us present. But
mhm.
how can you give someone fully informed consent about all the things that can go wrong if you don't even know what those things are, Or if you don't put it in language, like if I read the black box warning on a drug and it says you can become dizzy or something, I might be like, oh, dizzy. We all
Yeah,
think like dizzy.
mhm,
But the dizziness that I experienced in withdrawal was like someone picked my bed up, put it on a stilt, and spun it like one of those playground things that kids used to run around in circles on. Like the texture of the severity of the hell that I went through. Would they ever write that on? I mean, how do you, you know?
yeah, well, and I don't think informed consent or informed choice is 100% possible given
Yeah.
the conditions that we all live under, and some, of course, are up against so much more than others.
Hmm.
So my book is called Towards Informed Choice. I use that language,
I
not
like that.
not
Yeah.
not that we can ever guarantee that.
Yeah. That's a very good point. Towards. I like it. Yeah, because we can do the best that we can,
Can
you
do the
know?
best that we can, and we're always learning,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, I think there was an interview I did, I don't know if you saw it, but Margaret Heffernan, um, sh
no.
she's an expert on a concept called willful blindness, where people actually choose subconsciously to be blind to things, and she explores that whole thing. I mean, she has a fascinating TED Talk on the topic too, if you don't wanna read her book, but, um I asked her, I'm like, how can we all be less willfully blind? Because we all are, to some extent, guilty of being willfully blind, even if we don't want to admit it. And she said that we should pay more attention to dissenters in our circles, like people
Mm,
questioning and um, instead of just writing them off automatically as that, like, oh, that tinfoil hat, you know, Jan,
mhm,
always talking this critical, weird stuff. So she's calling us to like pay more attention. And so when people tell me or say to me, like, well, how do I get the real deal? Like, what can really happen? My answer is go find the people who've tried it. Like, is there a support group for people who took this medication? Like, you're going to find all the experiences in there. There'll probably be people saying, this is the best drug that I've ever taken. But
definitely.
all the harmed ones are going to be there too, saying, like,
Mhm,
I had all the fast language that you hear over here in the States at the end of the drug commercial of all the horrible things that can happen to you. That's real. And go find those people and see. And then you choose. Everything in healthcare is a risk benefit assessment, you know?
as in the rest of life,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And I think I repeat this statement in the book in a couple spots that many relationships with substances are possible.
Hmm.
And I don't have any interest in denying that somebody had a positive experience with a drug, but
Yeah.
their experience cannot be used to shut down somebody else's
Yeah.
experience.
Everyone needs a seat at the table here. And the harmed folks are not having a chair a lot of the times. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
I just wanted to add, in relation to that metaphor of blindness, just thinking of you know, people I know who can't see,
Mhm.
um, and how uh, blindness is just so often associated with, well, as like willful ignorance or like I don't know, like an attitude of turning away or whatever.
Like a
And
cognitive
so
dissonance or
what's
something.
that?
Like a cognitive dissonance or something. Yeah.
Yeah, or like a refusal to like I don't
Yeah.
know, just I'm thinking on the spot and maybe you could help with this. Is there a metaphor other than blindness that we could use to convey or to describe uh that kind of refusal that I think that's so important what you're describing. The refusal to engage. Is it arrogance or
Mhm.
um yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, you could dig deep into that too. I mean, even some of the mainstream psychiatrists, when you raise things, even on like Twitter's kind of where all of the discourse happens. They'll just block you if you're saying anything bad about, you
Mhm.
know, medications instead of like, well, why aren't we curious? Like, here's this patient. Like, why are they so angry at psychiatry? Or like, what happened to them? And wanting to learn, we just say, go away, not going to see your, content anymore. And we live in this like vacuum of people who are just saying psychiatry is good, psychiatry is great.
Mm,
And I think that's like the crux of your work is wait a minute. What about all these voices who are saying something else was my experience? Why are we hiding that and not, reading it, listening to it, and seeing what it means? Yeah.
yeah. Your words remind me of Sammy Timony saying there are some troubling facts to confront, and
Mm.
I guess it's just easier to carry on and leave the system intact. And
Yeah.
for some people who enjoy an immense amount of power and privilege within that system.
Yeah, and money. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love Sammy Tamimi, by the way, too. Yeah.
Me too, and I don't know why I didn't mention, his name at the outset, but there's
Oh,
so
there's
many
so
that could be
many.
mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
People
absolutely.
come to mind to me all the time, like, oh, what's a quote that I love? I mean, that was a good one. Adam Arato says chemicals have consequences. It's one of my favorite
That's a good
ones.
one to remember.
Yeah. He's a maternal fetal medicine expert who dives into giving pregnant or would-be pregnant women informed consent about psych meds in pregnancy. Another important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, a whole area. I didn't write about that at all.
Yeah. So that's your next assignment, Jan, is
I
go
think
read
so.
Adam Arato's work. Yeah. Before we go,
Uh,
because I don't want to keep, oh, sorry, did you have another question on that?
no,
Okay.
I think so.
I was going to say before we go, because I don't want to keep, I've kept you 10 minutes over the agreed upon time. I guess I just want to give you a chance to sort of, you know, leave us with any take-home message that you have or, something about your thoughts about reshaping the future of mental health in some key way. Any closing thoughts, really? Yeah.
Uh, okay, closing thoughts.
Mhm.
Well, first of all, to abandon, since you just mentioned mental health and the field of it or whatever, uh, to bust beyond that vocabulary because the terms
Mhm.
constrain us and kind of help us stay stuck in stuff that needs to be disbanded. Um, yeah, like the idea that some of us have mental health issues, mental health problems,
Yeah.
such
What is even mental health? What is
what
it?
is mental
Yeah.
health? What is mental? Like it's such a narrow,
Mhm.
decontextualizing, reductionist concept in the first place. Are we talking about a brain here? Because then that would be neurology, So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
even
Is our
just
head separate from the rest of our body, or is it all, can you have a thyroid condition that makes you feel anxious? You know?
yeah, is that
Mhm.
is that legit? Is
Yeah.
that okay? Like I imagine
Hmm.
that it is, without people being always seen through that same habitual lens.
Yeah.
So yeah, to kind of discipline ourselves in expanding our vocabulary
Hmm.
if we're used to using words like symptoms or mental health issues as though we know what those are.
Yeah.
Um, and thinking more broadly about the contexts of people's lives, the way systems, structures, institutions bear down on some groups more so than on others and
Hmm.
produce misery and tyranny. Um, so, what can we do to um, strengthen, liberation movements all around us? How can we participate in building a world that's safe and just um, and respects the dignity of everybody? And how can we speak up? Um, Ask questions. I think it's also been helpful for myself to realize it's okay to disappoint people, to not please everyone. Um, yeah, that
Yeah. And having the difficult conversations, right? I'm thinking of a
yeah,
friend who's just published a book in this space about her tragic experience with the mental health system. And she went on a very right-leaning podcast. I'm sure your politics in Canada is just as much of a mess as we are over here. Although, America's pretty embarrassing, unfortunately. But, everyone's saying, well, how could you talk to that guy?
uh-huh,
And then she also went on a very liberal leaning podcast as well. And it's like, well, I think the important part is just that wherever you sit, whatever it is, like we all need to be able to talk and communicate and explore these topics with people who think differently. That's how you get places. And I'm sure that a lot of that's happening in your classroom. Um,
Yeah, well, and in other learning, settings that I'm a part of, people coming from all walks of life
yeah.
and, finding ways to build bridges and connections with people. I do think that that's so important. I also think it's important that we connect this struggle with other struggles for liberation because I feel that they're all connected.
hmm Yeah. It's a very big, messy, tangled web. Uh, Sometimes I
Yeah.
think no wonder people just throw their hands up and say, who cares? I can't. It's too
Uh-huh.
effed up to fix. It's just too much of a mess.
And yet I'm sure you hear from people who say, "Thank you so much for this particular podcast. I had no idea." Like,
Yeah.
people find it also, liberating,
Yeah. It's true.
and we're always hearing from those people as well.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, I think unapologetic resolve and, be part of collectives where we can do this work in ways that sustain us
Yeah.
together, and we'll get sucker punched from time to time,
Mm,
but, yeah, we'll
yeah.
we'll keep learning and we'll keep speaking.
Yeah. It reminds me of a quote. I don't remember who it was. It was like in O magazine or something. Something when you find the issue that sets your brain aflame, like you just do it, consequences be damned, you know? And I
You're a
think,
hill to die on,
yeah,
as that saying goes. Yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah, you feel you have to speak.
yeah. So we'll just keep doing that. And I'm so glad that you have this course for people. I hope it just
Several
keeps,
courses.
yeah, several. I hope
Yeah,
people, say, oh, so interesting, contact you. Maybe somebody wants to do courses somewhere else. Like we need them everywhere. So thank you for your great work and your book. Um, like I said at the beginning, if anyone wants to purchase the book, we will put a link to it. Is it if someone's in the States and they want it, can they get it in the US? Or I mean,
through Canadian Scholars website, that would
okay,
be the best way to order a paper or, an e-copy of the
okay,
book.
okay,
And, yeah, and I'm happy to talk with anybody about curriculum development or, teaching or, um, yeah, anything related to this topic. And
okay.
thank you so much for
Yeah.
having me here.
Thanks for
And
coming. I'd love to take some of your classes. I'm sad that you're so far away. I look back on my college years and I think we're doing it backwards. Like we should go to college when we're 40, when your like brain is developed and you actually have interest and you're not like young and stupid. Because I have so much interest in things now. Like I would love to take a class and learn more, and that would be a fun one that I would sign up for, yours, I think. So, yeah.
you would bring so much expertise to the space. And, yeah, and we'll continue to use your work
Mm,
in our work also. So I look forward to ongoing learning with you. So in
okay.
that way, I'm not saying goodbye. I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm
Talk
saying
later.
I'm
Yeah, we'll be
saying
in
talk
touch.
later,
Yeah.
and, yeah, and thank you.
Yeah.
It's an honor and a privilege.
Yeah.
I take courage and also knowledge from the work that you and your colleagues are doing.
Yeah, me too. I'm so grateful for all the voices in this space. It's easier now that there's many of us, but I appreciate everybody who steps up and says, I don't
Not
care.
okay.
I'm going to tell the
Yeah,
truth.
yeah.
Yeah. Before we go, what is the email that you would like people to reach you at if they would like to contact you?
Is it best if I write it in the chat, or should I just say it?
You could just say it and then we'll also write it for
Okay.
people. Yeah.
Best way to reach me would be through my university email. So JN as in Nancy, and then a dot, and then my last name, which is DE, capital FEHR.
Mhm.
There it is. Yep.
Mhm.
At uwinnipeg.ca. Winnipeg spelled WINNIPEG, I think.
Yeah. Okay. We'll
When you
put
have
it
to
for
spell it out,
folks
you
so
know,
that
you
they
do.
could, yeah, just cut and it's, yeah, you don't want to butcher an email or you'll get it bounced, but we'll try
That's
to
right.
get the spelling right. We'll put it below for anybody who wants to just copy it and paste it and send you an email. So, yes.
I'll respond as soon as I can.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your great work and your book. And I urge people to get a copy and read because it's all very interesting, thought-provoking stuff in there that we all need to be thinking about and moving towards. Um, so, yes, I'm here. If you ever need to reach out, please do email, and I have your email now. So we'll be in touch. Yeah.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
You're welcome. Take
Take
care.
good care.
Okay. You too. Bye bye.
Bye bye.